Get started today with our podcast because I'm really excited to talk. I did so much homework for this episode. I swear to God, I hope I don't bore everybody because when I do my homework and I learn things, I'm just like, and did you know this? I even went and watched this amazing movie on Prime called, what is it? I'll have to look it up. I'll put it in the episode notes, but it was like Invisible, the Brontë story. It's a total dramatized version of the Brontë sisters' lives. And at first I was like, oh, this is going to be...
You really went there.
I really went there. And I was like, this is going to be sensational. They're going to do all these things to make it really fascinating. No, they stuck straight up to their lives. I listened to about 3 different biographical podcasts from leading researchers and biographers of the Brontë sisters. And when I was watching this, by the way, really fun movie to watch, didn't love the way it ended, but that's fine. I was like, these women just had the most interesting life for someone who basically never left their town, almost just lived and died there, had no friends except for each other. How were they so fascinating? I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah. Right? Boring people never get bored.
Oh my gosh. And that is basically the theme
of every... I'm saying only boring people get bored.
Yes. And that was kind of the consensus of the biographers. They were like, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but the sisters all died, their elder sisters dies, and their dad gets really scared. In 10 Things I Hate About You, how the mom dies and then all of a sudden the dad is totally afraid to let his daughters do anything. That's basically,
It's a common conceit.
Yes. And in this case, it was real. Patrick Brontë became terrified that something would happen to his other children. So he basically home educated them, wouldn't allow them to play with other children, just isolated them. And so these kids who were very, very friggin' intelligent because both of their parents were powerhouse intellectuals, they just retreated into their own mind and with each other. And their father fostered all this philosophical debate. And it was just, they became these little insulated geniuses. I mean,
well, let's start by talking to our audience. Why is it important to do some contextual reading or some investigation into not only possibly the author, but the time that the author's writing in and or the time that they are writing about? What would you tell people?
I think what I would tell people, what I always told my students is that have you ever watched a movie and then there's all these references or there's all these scenes that happen and something major is going down, but you feel like you're on the outside of it? You feel like they're having this whole conversation and you're not a part of it. That's what happens if you don't contextualize what you're reading, especially something that was written over 250 years ago. You're going to lose on a lot of these little tidbits because, they're putting in passive aggression into their novels and they're putting in all these little things that the people of their era would have gotten. Because you have to think, authors hope that they will be read forever, but they're also very realistic and authors know that they're lucky if they're just popular in their era and then they get forgotten and then they get paid for their books and that's it. So they're trying to make it fun for the era, not for people 200 years from now. And they're going to have all these little tidbits, little gossip things, little idiosyncrasies that people otherwise will not get. Think about an 80s or 90s song like, No, I Don't Want No Scrub. If you don't know what a scrub is, you don't understand what they're saying in that song. And even in today's music, right, there's going to be a lot of things that people in 50 years won't understand. So you really have to contextualize your novel. What would you say to kids asking you that question? Because kids would always ask me that question.
I agree with you 100%. And I think one of the most notable reasons why is one that you mentioned is we are 100 plus years removed from the society. So important customs and the way life was structured, I know we're going to talk about this soon, but the racial, economic, and social dynamics, while we see some of those remnants today, they are not in the same structure today as they are back then. So in the Victorian time, and we can go there now or not, the way race and class interact is different, I would argue, than today.
And
And
yet in
I would
some ways
say,
so similar. In some ways
right,
so very
in
similar.
some ways so similar, but class was really the immovable structure that you could
Absolutely.
not rise from. Class was the more rigid structure than a racial structure.
Oh,
What do you think
completely.
about that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And here's another thing. They're also not American. These are British people.
Right.
Their history goes back to the
Whole different
Romans.
history.
So, like, whereas Americans, money is everything. For the British and especially the Victorians, it's more about class and who your family knows. And, I'm Latina, and as a Latina, it's a lot more akin to Latin American structures where, like, you can
Hmm.
lose all your money. Your family name is what's more important. Your family's
Right.
history is what's more important. It is very rigid, and you don't break through societal structures easily unless you have a name that goes with it. So, all of that is absolutely important. And so I think that's one of the things that we're going to definitely talk about in this first episode of
Hmm.
Annotations After Dark, our very first episode. Forgive us if we're jumping all over the place. We're new to this. This is our first episode, and we're going to see it's
Our
happening.
first episode, we are going to talk about the context and the world that is Wuthering Heights. We'll discuss the author, Emily Brontë, and her sisters, where she came from, what her background is that led her to write her first and only novel, as well as the exposition, how it's set up and getting us into this amazing tale. So why don't you, Claudine, you've done all this research
Okay.
because she's the research queen. She can dive into it way deeper than me, and I love that about her.
I get
Um,
obsessive. Obsessive.
Tell us a little bit about the Brontë family, like who they are, what structures did Emily grow up under, and who her influences were.
Okay, so the Bronte sisters were the daughters of a pastor named Patrick Brontë. Now, Patrick Brontë, very important since we were talking about class structures, he was actually not of a noble or even middle class family. He was born in Ireland in a little cottage. And this man, at a time where you did not climb up in social standing, he climbed up. He clawed his way into Cambridge. It's almost like Abraham Lincoln, where he was born in a log cabin and then he ends up as president of the United
President.
States of America. This kid was born to an Irish family, which already is very much looked down upon by the English. They did not love the Irish, especially back then. He gets to Cambridge. He rises up. He starts writing some poetry. He joins the clergy. He meets the Bronte's mother, who's from a better and more well-to-do family. And she's very witty. We don't know very much about her, but just by the love letters, the let's call them the courtship letters, because it's a little bit unknown whether it was a
Love it.
blossoming romance or if this was just they had very similar values. But in any case, she was very intelligent, witty, and she just loved storytelling. She was very creative. Once she had her children, she would tell them stories, and a lot of the creative side of the kids came from her. They were a very happy young family. But then Patrick Brontë would get this stationing in a town where he was promised more money, and he was a very ambitious person. Charlotte, as we'll find out, is very ambitious, and she got all this ambition from him. And so when they offered him more money and a bigger house, he was like, let's go. What he didn't
Of
know,
course.
of course, but what he didn't know was that this town would actually be the destruction of his family. So he goes with his new wife, Mariah, and their young children, and they move eventually to Haworth. I'm skipping over a lot of the family stuff, but we don't need the nitty gritty. They move into this town. And here's what's interesting about this town. One, it's an industrial town. It's very working class. It's dirty.
Which isn't that kind of new for this time? Like,
Yes.
right? Like, so when Wuthering Heights is set, the time period is before Emily's actual life. Like, she's born later, where in industry is now part of like England. I said New
Yes.
England, England and
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, the Industrial Revolution is getting its start around this time, late 18th century, early 19th century. It's in full effect. Some background history. The Luddites are going crazy because, it's sort of like our anti-AI thing right now. They were just like, this is going to be the ruination of our country, yada, yada, yada. So anyway, he moves into this industrial town. It is filthy. It is, it is working class. It's a lot of impoverished people. So even though they got this bigger house, this bigger parish, more money, it wasn't as lovely as where they originated from. But the one thing, and this is very important to, the Brontë sisters, is their house is on the edge of the moors. So literally the moors are in their backyard. So if you walked out of their house, right, facing this way, to the left would be the moors. Like there was nothing there, just like a little hop and a fence over, and you're in the wilderness. To the right.
And that explains why so much nature is in all of their writings, every single one. Now, let me ask you, because some people have never heard of a moor. What's a moor?
Oh, a moor is, imagine like just vast countryside, but without any like major mountains or anything. There are crags, like really big stones everywhere, but it's rife with life. Like you've got birds everywhere. You've got, it's absolutely beautiful, but it's also, how do you describe a moor? It's also just like plain grasses. It can also be very eerie. So it's both absolutely gorgeous and absolutely terrifying in equal measure.
There's like this also, I've looked at moors in different horror movies. It's very atmospheric because a fog usually creeps in. There is a wetness to it. So it's not like the plains where it's dry, tall grass.
No.
It can be tall grass, right? But
it looks a lot like that in some ways, yes.
Yeah, and some kind of like a bogginess to it as well. But as
lots
you
of
said,
like rocks and nature and all that stuff. Yes.
So think of it as this kind of, it's a very Gothic setting where you can get lost. You can find little secret places for yourself and others, maybe. But it's a place that you turn one way, you turn the other. It all looks the same.
It really
and a ghost
does.
Might be lingering in the background.
You almost imagine, this is Ireland, not England, but you almost imagine like a banshee coming out of nowhere and just like ripping you away. And so to the left, they had this like beautiful, grotesqueness of the moors. I don't want to say grotesque. It's just gorgeous, but also scary.
Grotesque can be beauty. Yeah.
Yes.
Grotesque is beauty and fear wrapped together. So I think that's a great adjective.
Which, if you think about Gothic literature, that is the sublime, right? In a nutshell. The sublime is everything that reminds you that you are an insignificant part of this greater world and how big the world can be, and that fear and that beauty all in one. Think about like, a lightning storm, thunder, and that feeling that you get, but at the same time, it's kind of terrifying and you wouldn't want to be alone out in the wilderness in it, but it's also fascinating and you love it. That's the sublime. It draws you in. And those are the moors. Now, that's to the left of the children, and they spent a lot of time playing in the moors. They loved the moors. For them, that represented freedom, because to the right, you go into the industrial town. And in this industrial town, right on the other side of their house, was the town's cemetery and the church.
I want to live here.
And the church,
although I do want my like cities and everything, I would love to live by a cemetery. Well, I lived by a cemetery in New Orleans. Like literally, it was just down the street, and I loved it.
That is a cemetery I would love to live near, but I'm saying be careful what you wish for, because this cemetery is to the right of them, right? But here's the thing. On top of it being incredibly industrial, on top of it being incredibly dingy and disgusting. You have to remember the Victorian era. You go to London now, you're like, oh, it's so wonderful. No, there would have been mud roads mixed with feces. It would have been just gross, gross, gross. And on top of that, the cemetery was also built right next to the town's only water source. And so
Oh, lovely.
the water source that everybody drank out of. So very contaminated, not only by the Industrial Revolution, which, by the way, if you go to industrial town now, it's dirty. If you go to oh my God, my heart
I
still
mean,
goes.
isn't this really just very organic?
No, this is like the opposite of organic, Michelle. This is Flint, Michigan. Like they are not only
That's
polluting.
lead, though.
Yeah, but still, well, yes, they're an industrial town, and trust me, they did not have the EPA back then. There was no
I'm just
environmental
like,
protection. And so these people were
the
drinking water.
raw materials, the better.
No, honey. What ended up happening was they said Patrick Brontë actually baptized over 1,000 children during a stay. They had a surplus of births in this town. And yet the population actually continued diminishing. On average, they buried a person
So sad.
every day. In one particular instance, Patrick Brontë actually presided over 8 funerals in one day in this town. The life expectancy in this town, the average life expectancy was the age of 25. Yeah, they said that
That's mirrored in our novel, too. I mean, when we think about how many people, and this isn't a spoiler, I think we expect in the Victorian time in writings and in a semi-Gothic novel that there's going to be death. And we see that. And she must have, taken a lot of this path and reflected it into her writing.
Oh, honey, Emily Brontë saw way more death than any child should see. So basically the life expectancy also was 1 in 5 children would not make it to the age of 5. Of the ones that did, 20% of them would not make it to the age, I think, of 10. They were bearing children left and right. The ones that did survive were funneled. They were basically birthing kids to go straight into the industrial workhouses of this place. So they saw child labor everywhere. So this is where they were growing up. So that is the Brontë sisters. And in fact, their older sisters would be the first victims of this. Or actually, nay, their mother is the first victim of this town. When Anne is only 2 years old, I think Emily is only 4 years old, and Charlotte is 6. Their mother dies. Some scholars say of ovarian cancer, some say stomach cancer, and some say complications from giving birth because she was pregnant for basically 6 years in a row. She had these children.
They had a brother too, right?
Yes.
The 3 girls and a boy.
And 2 older sisters. And so after their mother dies, Mariah dies, their 2 eldest sisters, also named Mariah and then Elizabeth, they get sent to school. For those of you who've read Jane Eyre, they would contract tuberculosis in this school and they would die because of the conditions of this school. The father, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, pulls his children out fearing that he's already lost 3 of his family members in basically 4 years as soon as he moved to this town. This is not a coincidence. And so he is terrified of losing the last 4. We already talked about how isolated their childhood was, but their aunt comes and lives with them. And Charlotte all of a sudden finds herself as the eldest sister of all these kids. And they just have to rely on their imagination, on the moors, and on their father for education. And that's basically the Brontes in a nutshell. Now, Branwell was expected as the only boy to be the salvation for his family, right?
Right. And can I pause you there real quick? Because I think this is an important note about society at that time. So they essentially had 5 daughters and 1 son. Can you talk to us about heir rights? Because I believe we're going to see it here.
Completely.
Again, you did all this wonderful research, but we definitely see it as an issue that arises in the text.
Yeah. So to tie in what we were talking about class that you brought in earlier, in the Victorian era, it was impossible to rise up in station. You weren't born poor and then you married a prince. That didn't happen. Everybody stayed within their stations. But boys had a greater chance of being able to rise up in station like Patrick Brontë did. And so they had this law in order to protect the class structure, in order to protect the higher class and not let people in all willy-nilly. They had this thing called the law of primogeniture. The law of primogeniture basically stated that the eldest born son received everything. He inherited everything.
Yes.
So even if you had two older sisters, forget you. You better find someone to marry or hope that your brother loves you enough to take care of you, because he's
Right.
inheriting everything. Not even the second or third born son. The second and third born son better figure something out. They would usually join the clergy, or they would marry, let's say, a very rich American daughter in order to bring wealth back into the family. There were a lot of rules
Yes.
to this. So because he was the only son, there was a huge expectation that he would continue to like climb and take care of his sisters. Unfortunately, he buckled under the expectation given to him. Not only was he isolated, so he didn't have a lot of friends his age. And so, boys are usually put in their place by other boys. Boys are usually like, because in a family in the Victorian era, and you see this in the novels with Hindley, you see this in the novel with Edgar, and even in Charlotte's novel with John, you have these boys who are prized by their family. Everybody dotes on them. They're the most important thing.
My son.
Yes.
My son. My
They
son.
They poop out rainbows, and gold, literally, because they need the gold. And they're the only ones who can have it. So, he had all this pressure. They wanted him to be an artist. And he gets sent to London to become an artist at I think at the age of 16 or around thereabouts, to go to school. This boy doesn't even make it on the train. He ends up drinking all the money away.
Yeah.
And he falls into alcoholism and opium dens, and he just becomes a burden on his family. So that brings us to these girls now. This brings us to the gendered part of our discussion. These girls had to figure out a way to make money, and quickly. Think Pride and Prejudice. Their dad is aging out. They don't own this house. This house belongs to the church. The minute that the dad dies, they're out on the streets. And these girls,
they're destitute. They don't have any, well, I shouldn't say they don't have any prospects, but one of the ways they could get better off is through marriage, right? Which may or may not be in their best interest, which may or may not actually be available to them. You can't ensure that the person that, wants to marry you is actually going to be very kind to you.
Oh my goodness.
So what are they doing?
Marriage back then was not a love story. Marriage back then was a business arrangement. And you have to also remember that these girls were sheltered. Charlotte was, by all accounts, plain and ugly, very short, and too educated for her own good. And back then, being too educated as a girl meant nobody wanted to marry you. Emily had no interest in marriage. Emily was an introvert. I mean, she was, if she had been born in the 90s, she would be Daria. She would be your goth girl. She would not even entertain a man, I wonder if she might have even liked other girls. I mean, I like to think she would have. But anyway, and then Anne, the most beautiful of them all, by all accounts, did find love with another clergyman. It looked like that could have been something, but because this town eats everything in its wake, he dies also. Everybody's dying in this town. So these girls are like, we need to make money. Daddy is going blind. He's not going to be able to keep his job for too long, because at this point, Patrick Brontë, by the way, I keep wanting to say Bateman. Patrick Brontë.
Oh, God, no.
I know. I can't.
Not even the same quality of a person.
No. He's an amazing. Patrick Brontë, by all accounts, is a beautiful, beautiful man. He's such a feminine,
not the American Psycho.
I know. He's so supportive of his daughters.
Claudine. That's crazy.
I'm just saying it in case it slips out, okay? Because it keeps wanting to come out. Patrick Bateman.
Oh my
Patrick
God.
Brontë, who's educated his daughters, who really believes that education is the way to freedom, and he wants his daughters to have it all. I mean, an amazing man, but he's going blind, and he's going to lose his parsonage pretty soon. So what do the girls do? Charlotte Brontë is the one who, I'm doing a very quick summary of this now. She finds Emily Bronte's poetry, which is still some of the most beautiful poetry written in the English language. Emily, the introvert, the person who never wants anybody to know who she is furious. She's like, what right did you have to go into my private things? Thank Catherine Linton when, Lockwood is reading her diary, to to go into my private things and take my stuff. And she was like, we need to publish this, girl. You are too good. Like,
We need to make some money.
we need to make
Get
some
over
money.
it.
And so she's making
Like,
these
post
decisions.
your feet pictures, please. We need to make some money.
Basically. So
they publish it. I shouldn't say they publish it.
To rip-roaring success. No, I'm kidding you. It's a flop. They sell 2 copies, but it's enough to get their foot in the door for, making these connects with these publishers. So Charlotte Brontë goes, listen, girls, we didn't make it as poets, but poets, they don't make that much money anyway. And right now the real big thing is novels. And so
now, novels were just becoming a big thing. Like, because beforehand you had your like little penny dreadfuls, you had these speak to me a different word if that's not all the way correct, but little pamphlets of things.
Yeah.
You didn't have hundreds of pages.
No.
And those
At
who
least not
were
in
novelists, Charles Dickens, right? Many were male. You didn't have many female novelists.
No.
So the fact that all 3 of them wrote a novel is quite incredible.
It is. Like, at this time, Charles Dickens was a contemporary, and he actually even knew of Charlotte Brontë afterwards when she became big in the literary scene. But the only real female novelist that people knew was Jane Austen, and these girls were no Jane Austens. And so when they decide to write novels, they are very aware of the gendered structure of their society. Girls, again, are not supposed to be educated. Girls are educated to the point where they can entertain their very rich husbands. They're not meant to like debate their husbands on anything. These girls decide to take on pseudonyms with all their same initials. So Charlotte Brontë becomes Currer Bell. Emily Brontë becomes Ellis Bell. And Anne Brontë becomes Acton Bell. And so they publish under these names. Now, we can get into Charlotte Brontë falling in love in Brussels with her professor, or Belgium, but whatever. I think those are interchangeable. But the point is, they're interchangeable.
Brussels is in Belgium.
Brussels is in Belgium. I'm like, oh no, am I getting my B words confused? I'm like, wait a minute, remember your geography. It's one and the same. Yeah, she's in Brussels and she falls in love with her teacher who's already married. It's completely unrequited. And so she writes this novel called The Professor. Emily Brontë writes Wuthering Heights, which if you read her poetry is very much based on one of the earlier poems that she wrote because she was in love with the bad boy of poetry, Shelley. And so she kind of wrote it in that style. Yeah.
And then Shelley.
Yeah, and Anne, who was the most successful governess, because by the way, all 3 tried to be governesses, and the eldest 2 sucked at it. They hated children. Well, Charlotte hated children, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. They suck at being governesses. And so Anne, who has the most success as a governess, writes about being a governess. Hers is considered like a first feminist novel. Anyway, they publish these 3 works, and Emily and Anne get published right away. Charlotte gets rejected, which will forever be a stain on their relationship. It creates kind of a rivalry. We'll get into that in like the footnotes if people want to hear more about that, but, or I'll put down the episode links when I learned all this stuff, but it creates like a heated rivalry, between all 3. Except no sex,
not like that though.
Not like that. And so, so Charlotte Brontë, who is resilient AF, like this girl, all 3 of them really, I think experiencing so much death early on made them very strong. When she gets rejected, she's like, all right, well, I'll just write another novel. And that's when she writes Jane Eyre, which becomes the big novel.
Huge. Right.
Huge.
And Wuthering Heights was like, even though it was published, it wasn't well received. It was very out of touch. What society, Victorian society at the time would say was very out of touch and strange and weird based on their customs. So Emily was really talking to her audience about things that for them were very transgressive. Yes. And did not equate with the status and class of the families that were being discussed. So when we enter into Wuthering Heights, kind of to round our conversation, this
Mm-hmm.
is why having historical context prior to reading a text is important so you can appreciate not only when it's taking place, but how it was received and understand how it's evolved over time to now become, a treasured classic.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it is the greatest love story ever told, I think we both have strong feelings about that.
Well,
But nonetheless, here we are.
yes. And, if you're right, Wuthering Heights was not well received. In fact, Jane Eyre wasn't well received. People thought that it was scandalous for its time. Can you believe that? Jane Eyre was scandalous. And, they were like, oh my God, clutch my pearls. But if Jane Eyre was, I heard this on a podcast. If Jane Eyre was groundbreaking, Wuthering Heights was earth shattering. People were
Right.
so scandalized by this novel that one reviewer said, I am now convinced this could only be written by a man. Because they're like, it's too dark. What woman would know about this?
Right.
And this woman, she had no outside relationships. I mean, talk about the power of Shelley. Okay, she read Shelley and then she created something like Heathcliff. But we also have to acknowledge Branwell, their brother, also very much scandalized them. He had an affair,
Right.
By many accounts, suspected affair with the woman who hired him to be the tutor for her children. He came back he scandalized the village. So everything she knew was through this. And so this darkness, he was very much the inspiration for. That's basically, one last thing I do want to bring up before we get into the nitty gritty of the novel, because I've cut out so much. I promise. I know I've talked so much about this, but I've actually I've really censored myself. All right. The race at this time is going to be very important because in Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff is a person of color in this novel. There is no getting around that. The way he is described, he is either considered Romani, which back then they called gypsy, or Indian, because back then Queen Victoria owned, India. That was part of her empire.
Colonization.
The colonization is in full swing right now. And also there were a lot of, not only had they colonized Africa, but a lot of people don't realize, people are like, oh, a Black person in England? How? I'm like, Black people have been in England since the Roman Empire. They're all over the place. The fact that they weren't written about is a travesty, but they've been there since the beginning of England's inception as Great Britain. In fact, people are shocked to find out that Queen Victoria had, I think, three godchildren who were Black. And there were aristocrats who were Black. There were actors who were Black. So people were like, Bridgerton is so fake. Why do you have Indian and Black people there? Because they were there and because they were aristocrats.
Right. They existed. Their stories just haven't been told because that's not, the eye that was looking that way. And I love that you bring that up because it comes back to this, what is the difference between class and race? So question, I could be a Black person of color, and also come from a well-known family and still have the access to what my name would bring me.
Yes.
But to be poor and white, I wouldn't have greater access than someone who was a person of color and came from a reputable name.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's the thing is that's again, we have to remember that this is Great Britain, not America. This is not the United States of America. They prided themselves on having abolished slavery. They actually saw themselves as much more advanced and progressive than their American cousins in terms of race, even as they were colonizing. And, Queen Victoria's goddaughter, Sarah, baptized Sarah, that wasn't her real name, was actually such because Queen Victoria's colonization in the African continent made her an orphan, but she came from a noble family. She was the daughter of royalty. in,
Mm-hmm.
I forget which country, and please I apologize, but I don't remember right now off the top of my head. I have a terrible memory for facts like that. But when they realized that she was royal, they elevated her. That's how important name, status, and blood goes. She never was a slave. She never was sold. She became adopted by Queen Victoria as her, ward. So she had the protection. And that's how deep this kind of nobility goes. They really respected
Mm-hmm.
bloodlines. They really respected names and royal stature, which would have been unheard of in the United States of America because race took on a different kind of tonality. Never mind that the reason she was an orphan and the reason her parents were dead and the reason her kingdom fell was because of Queen Victoria. But she actually
Right.
did this.
There's
Yeah.
no excuse here being that, hey, the colonization that Great Britain did to numerous continents and countries is somehow like forgiven
Yeah.
over, the slavery and racism of the US. That's not what we're equating
No,
here, but
absolutely
we
not.
are just trying to contextualize the difference in the class and race relations so that when we dive into Heathcliff, we can understand his otherness and what that looks like on a multitude of levels rather than
Mm-hmm.
just like he's a person of color and that's it. There's so much more to it. And
So
also
deep.
the family who he comes in with, and I know this is jumping ahead just a
That's
little,
okay.
and we'll get into a summary of our exposition in just a second. But the family he comes to isn't really that noble.
No,
They are not an elevated name in themselves. So we'll unpack that, but
we'll
maybe
unpack
this
that.
is a great segue to getting into our summary of the first three chapters of Wuthering Heights. What do you think?
I think so. So that was part one of the podcast. We got into the context, we got into the historical background. Join us for part two, where we get into the first three chapters and apply everything that we've just discussed to the opening of the novel.